before we get started. Seeing a ton of people pour in, that's awesome. All right, shall we get started? We have a packed agenda today. Good morning, everybody. I see we've reached 51 people. It's so awesome to see everyone. As you all know, we canceled our last meeting, which was 2 weeks ago. So the last time we saw each other was a month ago. So it is great to see everybody's beautiful faces today. So, hi, I'm David. I work for now Nourish Colorado, formerly known as Livable Colorado. Great to be with you all. So today is call number 22 of the Colorado Farm and Food Systems Response Team biweekly calls. Amber, I think, is going to chat in just a document, a reminder of who we are as the response team, a reminder about Zoom etiquette, and if we've so far have not had any trouble, and so thank goodness for that. But if we do have any issues like Zoom bombing or anything, please chat me, and I will remove anybody who's causing any issues. Right now, you are automatically muted, but if you must unmute, please use *6. And then a reminder that last week's recordings and call notes and resources from past weeks are shared on Slack. And so please join our Slack channel and you'll be notified with a lot of different updates there. And you can also find past call notes and recordings on our team drive each week. We're trying to get to know everybody better and map out who is on these calls. So if you've never been on these calls before, if this is your first time, please chat in your name, organization, and email so that we can add you to our participant list. So that's name, organization, and email. Please chat it in if this is your first time. A reminder, if we do not have agenda items for future meetings, we may cancel the calls here and there, just like we did last time. But it's great to be with everybody today. So as everyone knows, we like to start our meetings with just a fun icebreaker question. So everyone get ready in the chat. We'd love for you to chat in your answer to this question today, which is, Halloween is coming up. So what is your favorite Halloween costume, either yours or someone else's? Please chat in. Favorite Halloween costume. If anybody does cosplay, you can also do your favorite cosplay. All right, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Matt.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all, and excited to spend a couple minutes sharing more about the latest round of the Respond and Rebuild Fund. Can you all hear me all right? David, I can see you. Can you give me, okay, I'm seeing lots of heads. It's kind of fun all at once. So I'll walk through a portion of this, and I'm going to hand it over to my partner in crime, Helen Kadich, who will wrap us up, and want to make sure that we have time for any questions you all have, and really want to make sure that if you're a potential applicant, that you know whether you're qualified and what to be looking for and helping us spread the word with others. So I will share my screen here. Great. Can you see my screen? Cool. All righty. So I'm going to kind of recap how we got to where we are today, and then Helen will tee up round 3. So just as a reminder, the COVID impact, has dramatically affected the supply chain and the livelihoods of Colorado's farms and ranchers. And the purpose of the Respond and Rebuild Fund is to provide flexible resources to those who, as a result of COVID-19, experience costs, losses, or the need to pivot their business models. And so the qualifying recipients in the previous rounds were small and medium-sized producers and entities that support medium-sized producers. What's unique in round 3, which Helen will talk a little bit about, is the addition of processors into the applicant pool. So now processors are eligible applicants. And so this fund is really designed to strengthen work happening in our communities and help organizations respond to emerging needs. The Colorado Farm and Food System Response Team is focused on equity. So within the small and medium-sized grower community, we also prioritize applications coming from Black, Indigenous producers of color, female farmers, beginning farmers and ranchers, veteran farmers, and LGBTQ+ farmers in the program. Just as a reminder, I know you've all been on lots of these calls, but always good to remember who's behind this fund, and that's the Colorado Farm and Food System Response Team. And you can see the organizations listed there. I won't read them off, but you can see an awesome constellation of organizations all working together to drive this impact forward. In rounds 1 and 2, just a little bit on the distribution. So far we've cumulatively distributed $372,000. That's out of $2.6 million in requests. So clearly we have been unable to meet the entire request that came through, but have been doing our best to direct resources where they're needed most, both to processors and to intermediaries. And just a little bit about what we've learned. Clearly, especially early on, was demand for access to PPE across the board, especially in the diversified production community. Desire and need for best practices on how to use PPE as well. Within the H2A worker community and non-retail food system workers, big effects on the outbreaks in processing plants and other places, which is in part why processors are now included. A really, I think, valuable attempt to balance a desire to feed local communities and the need for producers to sell at a price point where they can keep their businesses afloat. A key one, which is a big element in the round 2 and then the round 3, is this aspect of business model pivoting, trying to figure out how to essentially kind of circumvent the supply chain disruptions that happen in restaurants, schools, and other institutions. And so a big push to online sales, CSA, and direct-to-consumer models. And then finally, many being left behind in federal relief packages, and especially within Colorado's community, knowing that the growing season is later and losses hadn't yet been experienced. There were some difficulties in applying and being eligible, which is in part why there's such a big gap in between rounds 2 and 3. So we had held a small portion of funding for a round 3 that we were going to be releasing around now, acknowledging that we might want to understand what happened at the end of the growing season and not release all the funds at the beginning. Huge thanks to the Colorado Department of Agriculture for supercharging round 3 from about $120,000 to almost $1 million in grant program and funding. So with that, we have a much larger pool of resources to allocate in a short period of time. We have to get all the money out the door by the end of December in order to meet the CARES Act requirement. So the RFA is open, and I'm going to turn it over to Helen to share more about the round itself and how we structured the program. Please chat questions in the box and we'll try to answer those. And Helen, I'll drive while you go through the deck. Okay.
Next slide, please. I really like it when you're brilliant coworker. You get to say next slide, please. Function. Cool. It's really good to see everybody. I hope you're taking good care today. So yeah, as Matt was sharing, we are really excited. We got close to $1 million in CARES Act funding. So just a much larger pool for what has been a really large pool of demand over the first and second round. So he talked a little bit about this, but we're expanding the fund a little bit to not only include producers and intermediaries, but also processors in this round. I think that was a big topic of conversation during our Thursday calls early on in COVID on how processors have been hit. So pleased to be able to offer some of these funds to support processors in our communities. CARES Act funding, it must be directly attributed to a COVID-19 event. So it has to be focused on recovering any losses that are related to COVID-19 or business model pivots that are a product of needing to pivot due to COVID-19. So think was selling to restaurants. Restaurants closed down, needed to pivot business model into a larger CSA, for example, on producer side. As Matt already said, the qualifying expenses must occur between March 1st and December 30th. All of the funds need to be out the door by the end of the year. So all of the funds that are spent can be recouping any losses that happened during this last year. And that is a good note for any questions. So feel free, as Matt shared, just to chat those in and we'll get to them. Next slide, please. Thank you. So fund structure and governance, just so you know kind of how the fund is laid out and how we make our decisions. So the Farm and Food Systems Response Team, as Matt showed before, is made up of different organizations and some larger institutions, and the fund structure is one piece of that larger response team. So we have a grant committee, which I'll share with you who's on that grant committee in just a moment. So our grant committee is made up of folks who are in charge of the design of the fund, final decision making, and also holding each other accountable for diligence and review and excellence, all of that good stuff. For all of the, within that grant committee, I'll go into who's on there and why. We have subcommittees, which are made up on focus groups, particularly focusing on the producer category, the intermediary category, and the processor category. So that's the subcommittees within the larger grant committee. And then we do a community review process. So all of the applications that come in are reviewed by people just like you. And there's an opportunity for you to participate in this. So we ask community members who have particular expertise as producers or head of intermediary companies or processors or just like food systems heads from around the state to actually go through all of those applications and provide the first scoring of our applications, which is one piece of the puzzle of what we take to our larger grant committee for final decisions. Matt and I and our friend Ted and coworker Ted are your management team. So in charge of project management, data and evaluation, following the lead of you all on the grant committee and external reviewers. Next slide, please. Cool. Should I like give, Matt, can you see me if I like gave you a finger nod? Okay, cool. So this is your grant committee. Familiar faces to you all, I bet. So a lot of folks that have been participating weekly in these calls, some direct producers, some folks who oversee membership-based organizations. Next slide. We wanted to shift gears. This is an updated grant committee from the first and second round. We really started thinking about how to make this as participatory of a grant making cycle as we could. So really taking the leadership that we have from our amazing producer and intermediary and processing community to be able to take the lead and the reins on how the whole fund is designed and processed. And so you can see here in, it's pretty small, but you can see how this pie chart kind of breaks up who's who. So we have number of producers, folks who work with intermediaries. We have one person who runs a processing facility and some larger food systems statewide representatives as well. You can see the statewide impact there too. Ding. Cool. So key details on the fund for this third round. As we shared before, it needs to be related to COVID-19. Again, this is CARES Act funding that we're working with. So that can include losses and expenses. You can see right below here what some of those can include, and also pivots. So any pivot model, pivots that you've needed to make on your business model due to COVID-19 are certainly eligible. The funds are going to be going out in December. So as you can imagine, you could use that funding for any costs that might occur between December 1 and the 30th, but likely most of the funds will go for any costs that you've already had to spend on business model pivots or recovering losses from this last year. Ding. Applicant types. So we're really focusing on the small to medium scale producers, as well as processors and intermediaries. So you can see the gross revenue lines are just below here. So for producers, it's between sales ranging from $1,000 to $1 million. And for processors, a larger sum, $10,000 to $10 million. Ding. So this is our working timeline. We have an amazing grant committee. We designed the fund to what it is now, and now we're in the FRA open period. So we are currently accepting applications in all the way through the 9th. So this is when all of you come in. There's a couple of major opportunities for us in terms of spreading the word, which I'll share in just a moment. Beginning on the 10th, we're going to be plugging in our community review committee members and grant committee to start reviewing all the applications that we have and making final decisions. Awards and processing will be between the 2nd and the 30th. So like we said, all of the checks will be cut prior to the end of the year. Ding. Yes, so a couple of asks for you all. I wouldn't let you off the hook without a to-do item for each of you. First one is please share this funding opportunity with everybody you know who might be eligible. We're hoping to have a really strong applicant pool representing statewide producers, intermediaries, and processors. So please share this opportunity with folks who you think or know might have been affected with their work due to COVID-19 for these funds. And then we're also receiving applications for the Community Review Committee. So if you yourself are interested or you have a friend who might be interested in reviewing these applications, I cannot share how important this role is. It's really a key determining factor on the initial score of the applications coming in. So more folks like you who have expertise in this field, whether you yourself are a producer or run a food hub or whatever it may be, it would be really wonderful to have your mind and effort on this. The Community Review Committee, it's between, on average, like a 2 to 7 hour commitment reviewing those applications. It is a stipended role, so it's $30 an hour up to a $150 stipend amount for your time and effort on this. There's an application here, which I'll chat into the chat box, and we also sent that out. I believe Amber sent it out in the reminder for this call today, so please apply to be a part of that Community Review Committee, and we'll get you all set up in that role. We're looking for about 40 people total to sit on that team. And I think that's it from me. So I guess we'll, if we have a few minutes, we can take some of these questions that were being
Yeah, great. Thanks, Helen. I can try to take some of these and maybe you can review the chat box while those are coming in. Let's see, to Pam's question, there is a specific conflict of interest policy and members who are applying for funding can be reviewers, but they have to recuse themselves from any application that they have an interest in. Let's see, there's a couple of questions up top that I'm trying to make sure that they got answered. Can this funding be used for farming business interested in meat processing? The answer to that would be yes, but that would be considered, I think, a business model pivot. Where that would need to come in, though, is that would need to be money that's spent in 2020. So it would have to be probably beyond interest, but already in that pivot mode, incurring costs for meat processing. That just the nature of the funding is going to drive that. I think the second question, if I'm reading it right, was answered. And then collaborative organizations collecting data on this pandemic affecting farmers. Great question. And Casey, who's going to be following us, is the Colorado Farm and Food System Response Team's data lead. And we have a ton of information and she's probably the best to answer that. So right after we're done, Casey, maybe you can just quickly respond to that before we segue into the next piece. What else did I miss here?
I see Rachel's question, are there particular regions or sectors in the Community Review Committee where you need more representation? Yes. So we have pretty good representation right now in our applications on folks in the Front Range. If you are in the Front Range, still feel free to apply. Rachel's Southwest representation would be great. Western Slope and along the east side of the state would be wonderful as well. So particular sectors, as many producers and intermediaries as we can. And if you know a processor who might have time, folks with direct experience. We have a fair amount of folks who have larger food systems lenses, but more folks, and particularly on that note that Matt said, if you're applying to the grant, you are so welcome to participate in the community review committee. So yes, more direct experience, Western Slope, Southwest, and Eastern region.
Great. And Pam's question on funds allocated by end of the year. Awards themselves are announced December 30th. So the funds that whoever receives it will receive a check by the end of the year. What needs to be incurred in 2020 is the actual expenses that are demonstrated in the application. So once the check is written over to the applicant, they don't have to actually like expend that check in some unique way before December 30th. They'll have that money based on the cost that they incurred in the calendar year of 2020. We do have language for the community review committee. Helen, maybe you can try to drop that in the chat box as well. And for Todd's question on the review committee, there is no one that I know of who has Native tribe representation, but we have been reaching out specifically to the Ute Mountain and Ute tribes to make sure the word's getting out around potential applicants from those communities.
And then Lori's question on the Montezuma Food Coalition. The short answer would be, again, everything has to be related to COVID-19 between March and end of year. So if you had experienced losses from not being able to host events this year, or some of your education programming's due to COVID, that could be an example. So it has to be focused on losses and recouping those losses. The way that I've been thinking about it is if you have those losses recouped, if you have any money that you wouldn't have to spend in that case, you can use that for 2021. But the money can't be used for any expenses for 2021 and beyond. Does that make sense, Matt? Is that right?
Yeah.
You would explain it? Okay, great. Super happy, Lori, to talk to you directly though about your application. Cool. Well, feel free to keep the questions coming in. I'll chat in once we're done some language on community review committee recruitment. I'm also going to chat in my email address. So if you have any other questions, feel free just to email me directly, and I'm happy to respond to those directly. And with that, I'm really excited about this next presentation on the Project Protect. So I think with that, I'm handing it over to Damian.
Yep, you're going to hand it over to me. And Casey is going to share her screen. Thank you very much, Helen. Excellent. Let me get myself organized here, folks. Okay, great. So as Helen indicated, my name is Damian Thompson with Frontline Farming, and also one of the individuals who is responsible for convening Project Protect Food Systems. And so to start out and just give some context for Project Protect Food Systems, you know, as I said, there are some of us who are participating in Project Protect Food Systems who are also part of the Colorado Farm and Food System Response Team, and you've seen our faces and heard our voices on these calls for these last several months. And as we went through the work of initiating this particular response team, it became pretty obvious that during the pandemic, what we were seeing and what we were going to see is that lots of groups had mobilized around support for agricultural landowners, farmers, and other producers. We saw that federal relief dollars were really being directed towards the agricultural sector and has prioritized the needs of business owners, but those with specific types of vulnerabilities, such as food systems workers, from the field to the processing facilities, both immigrant and non-immigrant, had and continue to be, in our opinion, very much ignored. And so we really wanted to bring focus to the plight and to the experiences and to the already existing vulnerabilities of existing food systems workers. So we got ourselves together, we organized, we came up with our first statewide call. I think we had well over 100 participants in that first call, right? And we represent, or who was represented in that call and continue to be represented in our work are immigrants, farmers, scholars, activists, union representatives, workers, and organizers from across the state of Colorado. And so, as I said, the real goal and intent of Project Protect Food Systems is to organize and ensure that food systems workers, essential workers, are adequately protected from COVID and are appropriately compensated for their labor, so that the risks start to be weighed out by some positive benefit. So Casey, can you go to the next slide? So some of the ways that we organized our work, or have organized our work, is really in terms of thinking about working groups, right? And so the ways that we work, we start out by collecting data, right? We collect data, stories from food systems workers that really help us to illuminate the contributions of those folks to society, the way in which their work is undervalued, and the needs that arise as a result of that undervaluation. We are organizing social movements. We want to really be responsible for helping to raise awareness of food systems workers, their strengths, their dignity, capacity, resilience, ability to organize, and really kind of shine a light on so much positive work that is happening in the community right now. We really want to highlight the need for public protection and support, and to motivate for just and equitable social change. We've done a lot of work around policy, proposing and advocating for different types of action. We want to make sure that farm system workers, food systems workers, receive protections that are commensurate with the risk that they assume. And finally, we've organized ourselves to raise additional funds, really working to provide immediate relief in the form of PPE to immigrant food systems workers, and to enable all of this important work. So recognizing that if we want to make it sustainable, then we also have to leverage and be able to raise funds for this type of work, right? So the ways that we are continuing to work moving forward is that we're organized into these working groups: policy, data, social movements, communications, and fundraising. We're collaborative, we are generative, and we are working through these groups to get what we need done. And so each group meets once a week, and anyone who is interested can come and help out. So Casey, thanks. So really important, in addition to how we work, is why we work and the ways that we'll work together, but mostly why we work, right? And really understanding what we needed to do was to create a guiding set of principles, a guiding manifesto, if you will, to articulate some of the vision of Project Protect Food Systems, but most importantly, to really articulate what our group is going to be working towards and what we are about. So some of these are listed, and I'll just read them, and then I'll refer to a couple. Essential, not expendable, really. So thinking about the role of food systems workers within the current economic system, and understanding that we can't treat people who are essential as essentially expendable in the same term. No justice, no security. Really understanding that it's impossible to secure a food system that doesn't include equity and justice as the primary foundation of that framework. So if you have insecure workers, you're going to have an insecure system. Really thinking about protection of workers and environment as good business. Looking for equity and risk and opportunity, right? So the essential but expendable paradigm really reveals that some are being called on to potentially sacrifice their lives to feed the rest of us, to feed the economy. And so we really want to make sure that when we have these conversations that we're focused on equity of risk and opportunity. Excuse me. We want to nurture economies of solidarity and resilience. We want to recognize that communities are resilient, that individuals and people are resilient, and we want to support the resilience work of communities on the ground. And finally, well, the last two, land-based and people-based. So really recognizing that our resilience is rooted in land and people. And then finally, we want to elevate and amplify essential worker voices, and really recognizing that until those voices are liberated, then all of our voices, none of our voices are liberated. And so really we wanted to present that as the guiding, this is the why of why we do the work. and some of the vision as well. Next. Okay, so this is really important. Some of the key guiding principles or organizing principles of our work. This one is I think, essential. The subjugation of farm and food systems workers is structural racism and must be undone. And so really the context of that is that our food system is built on an apartheid system, which is really marked by racial injustice, and that works to create food insecurity for many different vulnerable populations. In terms of historically, our current system is really built on the backs of stolen labor from Africa and stolen land from indigenous people in the Americas. Today, the system continues to be perpetuated, and we understand that today as many as 70% of farm laborers are immigrant people who labor in a system which again has the contradiction of labeling people as illegal, but then essential. And then it's also really important to recognize that this type of exploitation exists across a spectrum of society and the economy, and even thinking about the increasingly coming to rely on prison labor for agricultural work, 40% of which is Black, 19% of which is Latinx, filling about 30,000 jobs in agriculture across the country. So really understanding that this is the system that we're talking about, and this is the system that created the vulnerabilities that are making farm workers, food systems workers, especially vulnerable right now to COVID-19. Next slide, Casey. Really important here to note that we want to represent farm workers as partners in producing food and fiber with aligned interests, right? And recognizing that a very high percentage of both Colorado, I think is 80% in Colorado, 84% of farmers nationwide make less than $10,000. And so really recognizing the nature of the exploitation that exists in the system and not pitting two exploited groups against one another. And so that's another one of our organizing principles, is not to be adversarial on that level. Okay, Casey, next. Great. And then before I hand it off to Hunter, really the third organizing principle, of course, recognizing that food is absolutely necessary, recognizing that workers and their labor, skilled labor, is absolutely essential. But that in a context where food is necessary, workers are essential, we must protect in ways that create some mandatory protections for workers. And so those are really those are really kind of our three main organizing principles around Project Protect. And so now I'm going to hand it off to Hunter, who's going to speak a little bit about our work in policy. Hunter.
Thank you, Damian. Hello, everyone. My name is Hunter Knapp. I work mostly with the policy team of Project Protect Food Systems. So the onset of the COVID-19 crisis forced governments to recognize the quote, essential role of food systems workers in society. Now that society has acknowledged our collective dependence on food systems workers, their rights and the dignity of their work need to be protected. The Colorado government took some solid steps to help workers who were experiencing a lot of the negative effects of the pandemic. These 4 bullet points that are on the screen, the Healthy Families and Workplaces Act, extends sick leave to people, and family leave, I should say, to people affected by coronavirus. And this is inclusive of agricultural workers, despite some previous iterations of this policy not being. So we do have to kind of give it to the Colorado legislature for being inclusive in that kind of expansion of family and medical leave. The Department of Public Health and Environment issued guidance that instructed employers to increase safety for agricultural workers in their employ. It arguably could have gone farther on a lot of points, but it did give some clarity to the industry so they could start moving forward with some protections. And then there were a couple other things by the Colorado legislature, these whistleblower protections and the housing and utility assistance that helped workers really maintain their dignity during work by allowing them to wear masks if they so chose and report their employers for violations of COVID precautions. And then these housing and utility assistance bills really just kind of helped people maintain their lives during the economic crisis. And Some of these policies we advocated for in our revised Colorado coronavirus response agenda. We really cannot claim credit for these policies. The credit should go to the many workers who advocated on behalf of themselves, to legislators, because that was really the essential force in making sure these things were inclusive. In our coronavirus policy response agenda, we do outline a longer term picture for how to protect agricultural workers and really improve their standing, both socioeconomically and just the stability of their lives in society. And I am going to copy in both a link to our revised coronavirus policy response agenda and some more information about another way that we can dismantle some of those institutions that really entrench structural racism. So Colorado recently created independent redistricting commissions for the 2020 census. Hopefully you all responded to the census. This information is then used to determine how many House seats that each state gets in Congress and how the state legislative seats are distributed among the people of Colorado. And so the Colorado legislature passed this bill to basically end gerrymandering, hopefully by including a nonpartisan group of 12 people, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 4 unaffiliated people on these redistricting commissions to redraw the lines for our maps. And I am raising it right now because at the halfway point, the applicants were overwhelmingly old, white, and male. The vast majority of them were either in the 65 to 80 age range or the 50 to 64 age range. 70% of them were male, and even higher percentage of them were white. So the goal of these commissions is to represent the diversity of Colorado, get people who are involved in their communities. That's one of the factors that they evaluate applicants on, which a lot of people on this call are deeply involved in their community. And then the second factor is whether they can build consensus, and a lot of kind of differing perspectives and people who are good at working together on this call. So anyone who applies, because of how few people have applied so far, anyone who applies will be considered by the judicial panel that selects people for these commissions. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me. The deadline's November 10th, but this is a really important way that we can kind of build equity and power for our communities. So now I will pass it to Fatima to talk a little bit about our emerging promotor network.
Great. Thanks, Hunter. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you guys can hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I remuted. Thank you. Thanks, Hunter. Good morning, everyone. So like Hunter said, my name is Fatima Imad. Happy to be with you guys this morning to talk about this. I was going to talk to you guys a little bit about the Promotura Network along with one of our partners, Luis Murillo here. So one of the things that we quickly realized in our work was that there's a lot of data missing and it's really hard to find this data. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in this awesome slide deck that really reflects a lot of the data work and how we approached it. So we looked through secondary data to kind of find out where ag worker numbers existed. We conducted interviews across the state to find out what people already working with ag workers perceived within their communities, and really brought this together to come up with some more solid numbers to represent the actual numbers of ag workers by category of seasonal, migrant, H2A, and also mapped it across the state. Data is important so that we're not acting like this is a problem that's insurmountable in Colorado. We're not Florida or California. This is something that approach if we can care to. And so I think putting it in that scope was helpful. We also quickly recognize that these communities, of course, have many reasons for why they might not want to share information and be easily reachable. And so we started to have a vision for creating a Promotura network across the state, as we often use Promaturas or what is also called navigators when we need to do deep community work like that. these communities are and have been invisibilized in terms of resource allocation or even being counted and considered under, say, farming statistics. And so, you know, that data work was just really important for us to do, and reaching out to them reflected that and made us realize, you know, while these communities have been made invisible, navigator networks have always existed within communities, that these communities survive and are resilient because of different people who come together to support them, from mothers, our children that translate, people that take you to access medical health benefits, things like that. So navigator networks have existed, have been employed by CDC, really originate from Mexico and have been utilized across South America. And so we identified this need. At the same time, state also identified a need to be able to reach these communities that haven't been reached in the past and where resources haven't been allocated. So they partnered with us to think about how to create this regional network. You can see the numbers are represented at the top. We then identified regional organizers who are trusted community members across the regions. And then we based promaturas at 2 promaturas per 400 workers in the region. And along with 2 promaturas, there's always 5 neighborhood organizers. Promaturas are paid for 25 hours a week, and neighborhood organizers work for about 10 hours a week. And so we've created this whole network across the whole state, and have just been completing all of our trainings and getting this whole system up. And as you guys can see, in the north is kind of one of the greatest consolidation of workers, almost all of our other regions combined. So that's good to know. We also compiled a lot of information around demographics, language, and who's making this up. So I just wanted to give you guys a brief outline. Check out the slide deck for more information. And most importantly, we have one of our regional organizers here who can really best speak for the Promatura networks. So with great pleasure, I welcome Luis Murillo, who works as a principal as well, and as a regional organizer in San Luis Valley. So Luis, I'm passing it to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Fatima. It is my pleasure to be here with this group. I have the pleasure of working in the South Central area, specifically the San Luis Valley. I will talk about our work. Our work really is based on great feelings of love for our community. And that's where everything starts from. It's work of justice. Through this work of justice and love, we exploit our relationships. We call it neighbors helping neighbors. We serve 14 communities across the San Luis Valley, specifically farm workers and their families. Our purpose is to leverage education, language, and access deficiencies by collaborating with local agencies to best support our farm workers across the San Luis Valley. This summer, as far as the impact that our work has, this summer we had several outbreaks in our area, and in partnership with our local agencies, we were able to help with information that was not only in their language, but was also delivered by people that look like them, speak their language. And when I say language, we're big on not just the language itself, but also coming from someone who is part of their community, part of their culture, that knows the colloquialisms, as well as the important information that needs to be disseminated. We do have a population of Guatemalan, Mayan specifically, community members who speak Canjobal. I am blessed and lucky enough to have people that support me from that community. So we're big in not only giving out the information, but making connections, making sure that people are being served in their language and something that they can understand. I have a story for you guys, and this one really touched my heart from a few weeks ago. It starts with, "Están haciendo el trabajo de Dios." You are doing God's work, said a mother of 2 who her and her 2 children were quarantining because they were all struggling with COVID. These are farm workers. And this quote was said to one of our promotores who reached out, took a food box as well as medicinal kits, as well as made a point to connect with that family every day just to check in, So I work more than education, more than resources, more than legal. When we need to connect with legal is human work. We want to make sure that our families are being served, that they have equity, that they have access to the information, to the services that they deserve. And again, we do serve 600 to 800 front workers at any time in the San Luis Valley. I do have a team of 15 of us, and I appreciate the chance to tell you a little bit about what we have going on here in the San Luis Valley.
Awesome. Thanks, Luis. And just before I turn it over to Damian, just want to say that our partner organizations in the Promotura network are called Tubando, who train promotores across the state, are based in Adams County, which is the most populated Latinx community across Colorado. And of course, the Migrant Farm Worker Division, Jennifer Rodriguez. So we, in our trainings, we do promotura trainings and then also legal and health-based trainings. And I know Justin dropped the link. We have a health-based training this Saturday. COVID is really rising in our communities. According to the CDC, we've gone from a 12% to 25% mortality rate amongst the Latinx community that we've been seeing. And so it's kind of scary right now. And we're grateful that we had and have this network up to support our ag workers and ourselves at this time. So just want to give them a shout out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Damian to wrap us up.
Perfect. Thank you, Fatima. And I think also thank you, Luis, for giving of your time. And just, it's a real blessing to have the opportunity to work with leaders in different communities like Luis. And I think that he also really spoke to something that's important in this next slide. It's not just about PPE, really, it's about how we are leveraging our networks and how we're leveraging networks and resources to really move what's needed to the folks that are needed, right? Whether it be PPE in terms of us getting donations, collecting masks, distributing masks, even now, to the same thing as organizing and helping to organize food boxes and different types of resources on the ground. So really, even more than PPE distribution, this slide is really about resource allocation and resource distribution and understanding how we can leverage our resources to really support the people who need to be supported in times like when the pandemic is increasing, as Fatima and Luis indicated. So we can go to the next slide, Casey. So thinking about, the work and what lies ahead, really thinking about beyond COVID in terms of thinking about beyond COVID as an acute, something that we're dealing with in an acute manner, really thinking about co-creating a food system that derives strength from dignifying and nurturing workers, their voices, their effort, their labor, their knowledge, all those things. And, one of the, I think, places where we're really going to be looking into working is advocating for a Colorado Farm Workers Bill of Rights. And, some of the work that I've been responsible with is really kind of helping Project Protect Food Systems and the social movements group developing power maps and really understanding resources and flows and how to influence our decision makers. And so, these are some of the things we're going to be working on as we move into the future. I know that there have been ample opportunities dropped into the chat to connect with us. And so we will leave us there. We will take the opportunity for questions. Oh, thank you, Casey. You can also see the information page, website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and also the info email at the very top. So you're welcome to communicate with us and we'd be happy to talk to you. So with that, I'm going to kind of, yep, go ahead, Casey.
Sorry, the only thing I would like to add is that our hour-large meetings are once a month on the third Monday of the month. So if you go to the website that Jason has dropped in earlier and sign up for the newsletter, that's where you get the once a month reminders on our meetings as well.
Thank you very much, Casey. And with that, as Matt and Helen did, we will open it up for a few minutes of questions. I haven't been really following the chat, so maybe someone else can help me navigate these questions that have come in, if there are any. So.
Yeah, I haven't seen any yet.
Okay, well, then the floor is open for anyone who would like to pose a question, either in the chat or verbally here. Okay.
I will drop in my email. And so if anyone wants to reach out to me or Hunter or anyone else on this team, we can connect you with the various working groups and get you set up with monthly meetings if you want to get more involved.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
This is Anne. I'm just curious where the funding has come from. It's amazing that you guys are able to support this Promotora network, and that's really awesome. So just curious how you guys are funded.
Thanks, Anne, for asking that very important question. So our Promotora network funding came through our partnership with CDPHE, and they have really helped champion some of this. Charlotte Olson, who's been the emergency relief coordinator, really brought us all together, and Sarah Hernandez there. And they have a grant called Healthy Neighborhood Communities that they allocated towards relief money and ended up doing it. All of this funding carries us through December. You know, we believe that, for example, with the Promotora network, that this is something that we should have and should have had, and it's something that should be long lasting in terms of creating support and resources for our communities. So we're certainly been working really hard on the next steps of funding to just, you know, be able to seamlessly carry it through next year. Also, we know that like there isn't this imaginary end date of COVID at the end of December or end of October with the CFAP boxes or whatever. So we're working hard on that. Other ways is through grant writing. We wrote some grants, received one grant through the state of Colorado, and some grassroots fundraising to distribute PPE at the beginning. We really just threw down our own operating budgets and felt like that was the most pressing thing for our communities in that time, and felt privileged to have resources ourselves as an organization, and we're willing to make those sacrifices as needed. So really trying to look beyond just this PPE or this COVID and response-based funding, and build sustainability, and really looking to different places like the Department of Ag, we really feel like this is more of a role for state and institutions and should be sustainably created than just philanthropy. So we don't want to fill these spaces in with just philanthropy, although we're, you know, certainly gearing towards that as we're trying to, time is going fast. So that's kind of where we're at. And then again, most of us are volunteers on Project Protect Food Systems. Hunter, who's amazing and helps on our policy team, was awarded a great fellowship through CU for some of this work. And yeah, most of us otherwise are just volunteers that came together out of the serious urgency we felt at that time. And so we're trying to build sustainability for going forward in terms of, you know, little project management and things like that.
Great. So if you have additional questions, Casey has put her email in. info@projectprotectfoodsystems.org is another way of getting information. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Grace with National Western, who's going to talk about technical assistance for growers and intermediaries.
Thanks, Damian. Hi, everyone. As Damian said, I'm Grace. I'm with the National Western Center. And I'm very excited to announce that the Colorado Farm and Food System Response Team has been awarded a $150,000 grant from the Colorado Health Foundation to run a technical assistance pilot program this winter and early spring. So the program is going to focus on providing individualized technical assistance to producers and intermediaries who are making strategic business pivots in response to the pandemic. So these might be things like adopting a CSA model, building an online platform to get your farm goods directly in the hands of consumers. There's a lot that can fit under that. And we'll continue to sort of flesh out the nature of how we describe the technical assistance and who is eligible to apply. The program is also going to feature some additional supports like access to classes, mentor networks, things like that, to be able to expand its scope a little bit. And as with the Respond and Rebuild Fund, it is going to be prioritizing our producers and intermediaries who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, women, LGBTQ+, veteran, disabled, new and beginning farmers, ranchers, and intermediary operators. So trying to carry forward the response team's commitment to equity in this new line of work, if you will. So much is still to be determined. The program is likely going to launch in December, so stay tuned for details. We'll make sure that everyone who's on these calls and broadly on the response team email list will hear about the program when we kick it off. And with just a few minutes left today, I'm going to close us out. We wanted to give the whole group a quick update about the sort of future and vision of where the response team is headed. We're currently evaluating a proposal from the Keystone Policy Center, who's been working with our group for the last couple of months to help us figure out what we look like when we grow up. How do we evolve this response team so that we can be action oriented and have profound impact, both in this sort of moment we're in right now in responding to COVID, but then also stretching beyond that. So a working group met yesterday, our vision team, and is meeting again next week to sort of refine how we see ourselves, how we plan to operate moving forward. And then we'll present that back to our steering committee and then eventually to all of you about what we can expect in 2021 from the future iteration of the response team. So stay tuned for those details as well. We just want to say before leaving that we're grateful to have all of you on the call today. It's always wonderful to see how many people show up to hear about the work that we're all doing, to share resources, to give support. It's really, I don't know, I find it really inspiring, and I'm hopeful that many of you do too. Our next meeting will be in November. We're only going to host one meeting in November now that we're doing these bi-weekly because we have the Thanksgiving holiday. So it's either going to be November 12th or November 19th. We're still deciding, but we'll make sure we give you all plenty of notice before we pick a date. Yet another thing to stay tuned to. If there are topics you'd like us to cover in the November meeting, presenters you'd like to hear from, sort of corners of our work we want to delve into more deeply, please put those suggestions in the chat box. Just type in agenda suggestion and then what it is you'd like to hear about so that we can collect those and hopefully present the most relevant information to all of you. And then a friendly reminder to please take the time to vote. If you haven't had a chance to do so already, the election is next Tuesday. If you go to iwillvote.com, you can find a list of Dropbox locations near your home or business. Thank you, Jess, for chatting that in. Really important that all of our voices are heard through our vote. So please vote. And then again, thank you all for joining. Thanks to our presenters, to David, to Matt, to Helen, to Damian, to Fatima, to Hunter, to Luis. It's really wonderful to have so many voices represented, both in the listeners and in the presenters on this call. So with that, we will let you all go and just say thank you again. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Amber, you can stop the recording now.